so important that we hear the stories about the victims and their families, and that if the corporate media in the United States actually told these stories, I think there would be a very different outlook that people would have towards these wars. For example, when the US invaded Afghanistan right after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, I realized that we were not going to see the innocent victims. And a week after the bombing started, I became very determined to go to Afghanistan and see for myself. And so we ended up taking several groups to Afghanistan to meet with these victims. And one of the most heartbreaking journeys was with people who had lost their loved ones during the attacks in Wall Street on 9/11, going to meet with people in Afghanistan who had lost their loved ones to US bombs. And I remember one particular woman that we met with. She was a mother of 7 children, and her home was destroyed, her husband killed, because they happened to have a house that was near a military base. And she had heard that the United States was a good country. She thought, oh my God, they must not know what happened. She wrote her whole story with the help of a neighbor because she was an illiterate woman, and took it to the US Embassy in Kabul to see if she could get a meeting and try to get an apology and some compensation so she could take care of her surviving children. She was shooed away at the embassy door and told that we don't meet with beggars. And when she told us this story, we were all crying and said, we'll go with you to the embassy. And so imagine these people from New York City taking this woman in a burqa in Afghanistan to the doors of the US Embassy and demanding that she have a meeting with people inside. And this was one example where we worked to get her some compensation. Of course, you know, it's very hard to talk about compensation for the loss of your husband and your children, but we also have to recognize that these are people that have no money and need some way to survive. And in other cases, we have met with people who have lost their loved ones to drone strikes. I remember going to Yemen and meeting with a man who must have been in his late 30s, and he brought 2 young children with him who were his brother's children. His brother was a school teacher, and to make more money for the family's needs, he used to moonlight as a taxi driver. And one day when he was driving his taxi, some strangers got into the taxi, and 20 minutes later it was blown up by a Hellfire missile from a drone strike, and his brother was incinerated. He brought the 2 children so we could see that these children would never see their father again, that his young wife would never see her husband again. And he said that he was from a large tribe, and said his tribe never had anything to do with the United States, barely knew what the United States was, but now everybody in the tribe hates the United States.
وصلنا والسيارة تحترق بمن عليها، والأشلاء متناثرة في محيط السيارة حول 150 متر أو 200. جمعوا الأشلاء إلى أكياس، وقمنا بتجميع الأشلاء وطفاء السيارة. كانت يعني ممزقة الأشلاء والمنع متفحم يعني لا يعرف منهم أحد. والجثث الذي بعثرت خلال السيارة أنصاف جثث، يعني ما عاد بشي تلقى جمجمة واحد ورجل واحد ويد واحد. يعني منظر نعاني من نفسيا إلى اليوم. يعني كل ما يجسل الصورة مرسومة في ذهني ما بتفارق ذهني أبدا.
And it was a very strong example to me about how things like these drone strikes perpetuate the cycle of violence. In a place like Yemen, revenge is part of the culture. And it's not just one generation. It might well go on for other generations. So we are planting the seeds of hatred and building enemies for decades to come. I have also been to Pakistan, where the US drones have been killing people, particularly in Waziristan, met with school teachers, met with tribal leaders, met with people who were the peacemakers in their community and had been killed by US drone strikes. And similar to the cases of Yemen, realized that we are just creating enemies and killing so many innocent people without apologizing, without acknowledging if indeed these were mistakes, and without compensating the families. And in the case of Pakistan, we were saying that any young man of military age in the areas where we were using these drone strikes were militants. And so it was okay to kill them without knowing if indeed they were involved in militant activity. And on top of that, it's important to say, what does militant activity mean? Because shouldn't the US just be protecting itself from people who are trying to kill Americans? I don't think anybody in Waziristan is trying to kill people in the United States. There are internal conflicts going on that the United States should not get involved in. And unfortunately, that is happening all over the world. One of the most successful things we have done is to work very, very hard to get visas for some of these victims to come to the United States and tell their stories. We got people from Yemen to speak before the US Congress to talk about what drone strikes had done to their families. We also brought people from Waziristan and Pakistan to not only speak before US Congress, but to get before the US media. And these have been very important and very rare examples where the victims of US policy, the families of those victims, actually have a chance to speak directly to the American public.